The United Nations climate talks, COP29, are underway in Baku, Azerbaijan, and they come at a time when climate change impacts have grown substantially. In the past, developed nations have undertaken to contribute $100 billion per year to support developing nations in mitigating and adapting to climate change. But up until now, that has consistently not been forthcoming. But at COP29, there's talk about the new Collective Quantified Goal, a post-2025 climate finance target, which is now looking to move the annual support target to around $1 trillion per annum. Well, to discuss some of the key issues and to interrogate how realistic the new financial support targets are, I'm joined by Punki Modise. She's the Group Chief Strategy and Sustainability Officer at Absa. Punki, thank you so much for joining us. So this year's conference seems to be all about the finance aspect. Who's coming up with the $1 trillion plus figure as a suggestion for climate change financial support? Presumably this is still a negotiation between the funders and the fundees, if I can put it like that. And the cynical part of me does say, if developed nations couldn't consistently manage the $100 billion per annum promise, how on earth are they going to manage $1 trillion per annum?
Thank you so much for having me today, Nompu. I think maybe the best place to start is just by acknowledging that it's an exciting time, I think, for the world, especially given the gathering for COP29 in Baku, to your point. It is a pivotal conference focused on climate finance reform, often referred to as the finance conference this year. So I would say that, for us here at Absa, this gathering isn't just about policy. It's also about creating real change and meeting, the continent's needs, which are unique in many respects. And then to your question, around, who, should be supporting this funding, I would say that, for us at Absa, we see this new collective quantified goal as a gateway to equitable climate action. At the same time, it's an ideal goal, that would truly support developing nations to deliver, accessible, predictable, as well as debt-free financing. So for me, I think, this is an essential, space that we're in particular for Africa, where urgent adaptation to climate impacts as well as resilience building are priorities. So, by their very nature, I think we have to advocate, as a continent for a co-created framework. And in my view is when I look at, what we're doing with, from an Absa point of view, we are definitely pushing for finance mechanisms that reflect Africa's realities, which is all about supporting sustainable growth without the strain, I think, of debt, in particular, for many of the countries which are still suffering the adverse impacts of COVID.
Yes, no, absolutely. So, of course, we use these fancy terms, climate mitigation, adaptation, and all of that. If we were to secure these funds, whatever the funds those are, just break it down to, the ordinary viewer, how we would be going about spending on mitigation and adaptation, especially in our environment here on the continent, where we suffer with agricultural impacts. Infrastructure hasn't been that great and it also gets damaged and so on. So just give us examples of what that would look like.
Yeah, to your point, I think, first of all, probably it's better just to start by saying that, debt-free support is critical because, African nations are already, suffering financially, yet, they face some of the world's most harshest, I would say, climate impacts that we've ever seen in a long time. So to that effect, and also to your question, then the big issue becomes, how do we make sure that, the continent is resilient to some of these, adversities that we face? And to a large extent, mitigation is all about ensuring that we can create resilient, communities as well as societies to ensure that ultimately, when we are faced with all these climate adversities, and harshness, we can be able to effectively respond. Thanks, Nompu.
So, you know, I'm just looking at the context that we're in. The US has just had its elections. Donald Trump has won the elections. He's basically, you know, talked about drill, baby, drill. You know, let's go and drill more oil. It looks like he's going to throw away any papers that are related to climate change and possibly withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement again. And of course, the US is the biggest economy in the world, and we would be relying on funding from them. So let's park them on the side. And then on top of that, you've got the European Union and China not having the best of economic times right now. So realistically speaking, whether we get debt-free cash, you know, whether we get interest-free cash or whether we get loans, where are we going to get this money from realistically, $1 trillion per annum?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. My sense, Nompo, is in this space, you always have to follow where policy makers are going. And to your point, I think on Donald Trump, yes, he's got his own views, but at the same time, I would say that the core thing is to look at the legal framework and where that is going. And, you know, there's a lot of case law, I think, at this point in time, which talks to, you know, the fact that, you know, the world is continuing to transition. If you look at South Africa in particular, I mean, we've just promulgated the climate bill recently. And that is also another step forward, I think, on issues of climate. So even in Europe, you know, when you look at Europe continues to move forward, you know, with their ambitions. So you will hear, I think, lots of views in this space, and most, you know, coming from the left and some coming from the right. But the place to really place focus on, to a large extent, is how policy is shifting. And to a large extent, I think policy remains intact at this point in time. And that's what guides, you know, how companies respond. It also guides how governments respond. So to that effect, we'll have to wait and see, you know, what Donald Trump will do. But my sense is policy direction is very clear, and a lot of the countries are moving forward with this agenda.
Yeah, all right, Punki, we wait and see. But thank you so much for your time there. That was Punki Modise. She's the Group Chief Strategy and Sustainability Officer at Absa.